Alrighty, thanks everybody for joining us today. Next up, we have Clackamas Coot joining us to talk to us about healthy soil. A lot of people we've heard from people about koi, we've heard from people about cannabis, we've heard from people about all kinds of other things, and we've heard lots of different speakers talk about combining aquaponic nutrients with their soil systems or utilizing them in combination. And it's certainly great to have Coot with us today. He's certainly a person that I highly look up to and love always having conversations with. I think we have 20 or 30 hours between my podcast and Fumadors together of awesome educational content for people talking about all kinds of great, mainly dispelling myths about silly stuff that people need to know about. But he's a great guy, and we love having him on the as part of this conference, and really appreciate him taking the time to come out here and speak with us today. So thanks a lot for joining us today, Coot.
You're welcome, and thank you for the invitation. And I kind of feel out of place after looking over your, well, not roster, but the subjects. So the only thing I know about fish are, let's see, I've fished for them off of Mexico. I've had saltwater tanks. And as a kid, I had some freshwater, Siamese fighting fish. You know, you get all jacked up on some bad weed, go down to the pet store, get a couple Siamese fighting fish, and place pets. But anyway, you do stuff when you're bored. So we didn't have bowling for dollars in those days on TV. So anyway, so my story, I once read on, I think it was Fumes when it was broadcast, and one of the people in the zoo troop, the chat room, if you will, said that I was boring because I always said the same thing. Well, sit tight, Cupcake, because you're going to get bored again. I've been on this deal for, let's say, 20 years. But it's been perfected, or I think I've moved the goalpost. And so my whole thing is about building the finest soil amendments we can do using very old systems that go back, 3,500, 4,000 years to China. And they got renamed by the stoners in the 80s in Amsterdam. So all of a sudden the biointensive got renamed Sea of Green. Because that's a lot more groovy sound than, biointensive, not biodynamic, biointensive. Basically where you're planting close on center to block out weeds, the drill, and reduce, evaporation, and, good water management systems like that. And I did that course back in, let's see, 86. I went to Jevons facility and took the wheat course in biointensive gardening. That's a double dig method. You remember that when that was popular, the 5 by 20, 100 square foot beds and that kind of thing. And the book that he wrote is titled, I'll Get It Mangled, but it's got all these words in the title. How to Grow More Vegetables and Fruits in the Least Amount of Property You Ever Thought Possible. Something like that. And anyway, that book's been in publication for a better part of, I think, 45 years. And it's based on Alan Chadwick's work from England back in the first part of the 19th century, or 20th century. But even that then dates back to the 15th century France, where it was called the French intensive technique. And then we can trace it back to China about 3,500, maybe 4,000 years. So where you could feed a lot of people in a smaller amount of real estate has always been the goal of every, not just a goal, but a responsibility of every kingdom or empire. You've got to feed the people, and you need to be able to do it with least amount of real estate. But basically, I found a recipe that dates back to 1938 at Cornell University. There was a symposium, and this emerging thing called horticulture. A lot of things were cast in stone, if you will. For example, you ever notice why a number 1 pot isn't a gallon and a number 2 isn't 2 gallons? Because it was measured that day at the symposium that a number 1 would hold 1 shovelful of soil. And we're thinking in gallons. It was practical. So now today, when you go to a professional nursery supply and look at the different products, it will explain what their numbers mean, because it's not that's just one area. I mean, as an example of why things don't seem to make sense. And some that cater to the cannabis trade tend to put their number one is a 1 gallon, because they're dealing with a different market demographic than someone who's been around the nursery trade 30, 40, 50 years. Because you have a lot of multi-generational operations here in Oregon. I mean, think about it. You've got about 1,000 producers that generate about $2 billion a year. I know that's nothing compared to cannabis, but believe me, in the world of agriculture, that's serious money, volume. And so my training comes from that, from having owned a nursery, doing Japanese lace maples for landscape architects, for resorts, hotels. And so you have those on your property 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 years, depending on the variety. So good management of your soil. First, you got to start with good soil. I know this isn't popular, but I firmly believe this. You cannot amend your way to a good garden if you start with crap. It's just not in the cards. Otherwise, we'd be growing in the desert. See what I mean? On a big scale, and not selective cropping, with pinpoint, what do you call it? Not drip system, but irrigation, that kind of things. See, and that's another thing. I came out of the produce sector, the wholesale produce sector. I walked more farms than I could even begin to try to count. And I was involved when the transition, when things were moving from conventional to transitional and finally organic. I mean, this isn't, having large volumes of organic produce is something relatively new, like in the last 20, 25 years, if that. And anyway, you get the idea. I mean, so I had a lot of that information, and I took and applied it to a potting soil. And so the so-called, I didn't name it, someone did on a bulletin board. The predates social media. I think it was either Grass City or IC Mag, Nipsey Nirvana's little deal. And somebody called it Coot's mix. So anyway, basically it's based on the Cornell mix of 1938. And just to briefly run it through, it's 3 parts. You have your bioactive material, compost, or I prefer vermicompost, which more often than not is compost that's gone through the vermiculture process. So it's value-added compost. How's that? We use modern terms here. And then 1/3 sphagnum peat moss, not peat moss, but sphagnum. Some of you maybe have to ask your dad or big brother or something. In the old days, there was tops and shake. Okay, so sphagnum's tops and peat moss is shake, and it's no more complicated than that. And what sphagnum gives you is structure, which gives you airflow and water flow into the root zone. And so it creates an aerobic environment, because what we're trying to achieve here is high levels of microbes. We don't get them out of bottles. We start with good material and build on that. And then the other component, of course, is aeration. Now, how you get there, I don't want to get involved in that one. It's too stupid a conversation. Perlite's probably the least expensive. You can buy that in 4 cubic foot bags at Home Depot for under $20. So don't go to a grocery store and get it. It's not special. It's just perlite. And if you want to find the producer in your area, I'm not joking, there's actually an organization called the Perlite Institute. That's a true story. And they'll have all the manufacturers, and they don't manufacture for nurseries. That's one of the smallest market things of perlites. It's real big in concrete. And I'm not a concrete person, but I know that it's used like for tilt ups. It's added to the recipe, and there's some, I don't know all the reasons why, but that's where the focus is. So you wouldn't believe how many perlite manufacturers there are around the country. It's kind of really, you know. And of course, Oregon being a big nursery state, we have one here. Don't remember the name now. Pyramid perlite. It doesn't matter. They're all, it's all the same deal. It's popcorn. It's rock popcorn. I prefer pumice, which is also known as volcanic glass. It's completely inert. It does not go anywhere. You know, it's there in perpetuity, and it has a lot of holes, which gives you nutrient sequestration. And if you can't get pumice in some parts of the country, they'll sell its cousin called scoria, and it's sold under the generic name of lava rock. That's what's in those barbecues. The rock that they put in there is scoria, and sometimes at landscape yards, especially in Southern California, they use it you put on your flower beds. Anyway, so you could use scoria, and that's again, it's inert. It has all the holes, and it gives you that aeration. It's going to build up the aerobic profile of your soil, and that's, in my experience and the experience of other organic soil people, that's what gives you the big yields, whether it's flowers, whether it's fruit, whatever it is good a soil that's alive and it's aerobic. There's a lot of air moving through there. That's what earthworms do. They create air passages as they move through the soil, pulling up minerals from the deep subsoil, a subroot, and deposit it on top. So you see that cycle, that life cycle. And the more that we can copy that, if you will, to however you're setting your gardens up. That's why I use smart pots. Again, I want that aeration. I want that airflow in and out of that soil mass. And I want those when I'm doing worm castings, because it's an aerobic process. The more oxygen we can get in there, the better results we're going to have. I hope that makes sense. And then my amendments, I know I don't want to get into that one, but they're minimal. The salt leads the way, and it's very core. Soil biologists will tell you that soil is simply, at its most basic definition, is rotted animal and plant material and shattered rock. Where'd the shattered rock come from? Lichen. What's lichen? A combination of fungi and bacteria colonies that over billions of years pull off sheets of the layer, right? And over billions of years, that's how soil eventually became as we know it today. And I'm a minimalist. I use maybe more as because I think maybe I have to. I add a calcium carbonate, and which is usually limestone, or sometimes I buy the oyster shell because it's cheaper and it sounds more cool. Oh no, I use oyster shell. So, but that's all limestone is, oyster shells, or excuse me, seashells. So it's really like a difference without a distinction. And then I use kelp meal, raw kelp meal that's been dried and then cut to a consistent size by, there's only two big companies in the world. One's in Norway, and that's a Maxi-Crop. And then the other one is in Nova Scotia, and that's Acadian Sea Plants. Everybody else buys theirs, rebrands it. You have to have a license. You can't just go buy a trawler and go out into the ocean and start yanking. I guess you could, but the cost would be, what are you going to do with it? You can't sell it. But anyway, and then my favorite one, and actually there's two, and they're both from India. Karanja, also known as Pungamia. That's a legume. So think of alfalfa on steroids. And then the other one is neem meal, which is think of olive, and you're taking the kernel and you press the oil. Anytime we do that, the resulting material is called a meal or a cake. So the only exception to that is alfalfa, but like cottonseed meal. That's cotton seeds that had the oil pressed out for whatever reason, some, money thing. And what's left over then is cake or meal. It can be used as as livestock feed. And some people might, I wouldn't, but some people would add it to their soil mix. But that's where you get flaxseed meal and all those other things that we like using, right? Soybean meal. Those are all sometimes called defatted soybeans. That means that the oil was pressed out of it. So now it's a thing, and we can feed that to worms. We can put it, there's a lot of ways to use it without directing. If you don't want to use it in your soil, you can certainly use it in the compost, a thermophilic compost. And can I explain composting for a minute? Because there's so much misinformation. Compost as we know it today is a relatively new phenomenon. It only dates back about 91, 92 years, the late 20s in Germany, and the group that, the biodynamic, who they based their practices on the writings of Rudolf Steiner. Okay, and anyway, so we now refer to it as thermophilic because there's a temperature thing involved, and that's to kill pathogenic bacteria and fungi. And so that's taken up to 140. But that heat does nothing, and I mean nothing, as far as actually breaking the material down. You can't even cook an egg at 140, all right? So it's a mixture, and you make it like lasagna. You have carbon, which is, think brown, and some nitrogen, think green. And you can use anything, comfrey, stinging nettles, alfalfa meal, it doesn't matter. The brown leaves, straw, not hay, straw, which is the stalks of grains, barley, wheat, rye. And that then, and this is it's taken up to 140 only for one reason, and that's to comply with practices and in some cases state requirements that you take it up that high to get rid of pathogens. But it's not composting anything. So it's microbes that will break this down. And when we get down below 100 Fahrenheit, somebody else can do the arithmetic. I don't know what that means in terms of centigrade. Now we're in the mesophilic, and that's the range between about 99 to about 68, so about 30, 31 degrees. And that's the mesophilic. Now we destroyed the microbes. That was the whole purpose of the thermophilic cycle, right? So now we need to rebuild those colonies, and that's where we add things that reintroduce not only microbes, but microbe foods, and it raises the nutrient profile of that compost. And that's, we could get into a whole discussion, but those are all the things, the meals that we just mentioned, those would be things that you would add. Because if you add them at the front, then you destroyed all of the phytohormones, the compounds, right? Because those are all just simple hydrocarbons. So you need to add them at a temperature that they're not going to deconstruct. And that's why you wait till you get down below 100 Fahrenheit. And that takes a long time. I mean, for good quality compost, you've got to figure 8-9 months of what most people call curing. But that's what it is the mesophilic. Now, what I do at that point is then I take that material and put it into the vermiculture and start doing some other things with it. And then it runs through the worms cycle. And there you're talking another year or so. This isn't instant results, so it's not very popular. I'll tell you where it's popular with are what we call market producers, the folks that do the farmers markets. It used to be called truck farming at one point, but now it's called market producers. Because they understand that the better their soil is, the better their fruits and vegetables and increased yields. So it is a thing of, soil building. That's why the term is what it is. And I know that's not popular because we all want something. We just go grab a bottle. See, it says right here, man, it's got microbes in it. Yeah. So which ones? Well, I don't know, but it's right here on the bottle. And you could take your fingernail and, rub it in the soil and stick it in a bottle of water and say, look, it's got microbes. That has absolutely nothing to do with viability or whatever. So there it is. It's that simple, build a good soil, and the whole focus is on the quality of your compost. The rest of it's just so much jibber jabber,
You talk a lot about malted barley as well for providing chitinase, and I think a lot of people don't realize that they can get chitinase from things like malted barley. I think that it's mostly coming from insect frass, and I wanted you to talk maybe a little bit about that and how there are other options.
Well, absolutely, and I was surprised when I learned that, and that's an important distinction, not chitin, chitinase. And chitin is a polysaccharide. It's an acetyl form of glucosamine. Bacteria cannot deconstruct polysaccharides, but in their feeble attempt, they create an enzyme called chitinase. And plants use chitinase. Plants also create their own chitinase. One of the main defense system in a plant is the chitinase-salicylic acid pathway. Salicylic acid is not unique to this or that plant. It's almost, well, I have to exclude desert because I'm not knowledgeable, and I'd have to exclude some tropical plants. But let's talk type 2 chlorophyll plants, which is a majority of agriculture. Anyway, you get the idea. I don't want to get into about orchids because I'll probably mess that one up. But so it's not necessary that you use barley at all. It's an easy way because you're picking up protease, which is going to work. It's a catalyst for protein, urease for urea, phosphatase. What cannabis lover doesn't want to talk about phosphorus? I mean, come on, let's get real here. All right. And you get the idea. And so all these things were encoded by the host plant for a seed. And it's not just barley. I didn't even know about barley when I started my research on this. But I understood that when the seed was germinated, a whole bunch of properties are changed in that process. Enzymes get from this to this. And the seed is provided with, is anyone who's ever done any kind of, planting a seed, that seed doesn't need anything for the first, several weeks. So it has to have its own defense system. So the seed is encoded with all kinds of neat stuff. With chitinase being one, because what does chitinase do in the soil? Well, one of the things it does, it deconstructs insect eggs. So in a rather existentialist way, you could say that chitinase is an IPM. I don't know. I'll let others battle that one out. But what I do know is that it increases the bacteria level in worm bins, and bacteria only eat one thing. Excuse me, worms only eat one thing, and that's bacteria manure, exude, poop, whatever term you want to use. As wonderful as worms are, they lack teeth and they lack a stomach. So they suck up bacteria slime. And in their biology and in their digestive tract, that material is carbonated, meaning that it's coated with a calcium carbonate slime, which is why people who have really good worm castings, you never hear a discussion about pH issues or, any of that silliness. It's taken care of. So it goes back to building a soil the right way the first time. And unfortunately, you're not going to find it in a bag. It's just the minute you put that material in a bag, the clock started clicking. Now imagine it's sitting in a parking lot at the grocery store in a pallet out in the sun. And by the time you get it's been out there for 3 weeks, you think there's any biology in that bag? Of course there isn't. You know, I mean, it's a nice thought, but, you know, figure something else out, make your own. But as far as chitinase, there's a lot of, some of you older guys will remember a product called chitosan that was sold. It was a liquid product. Okay, that was simply chitin, the polysaccharide. This is stuff they use for sutures, and they have since the 1880s. It's not a new, you know, thing or something. In fact, Albert Hoffman, the man who discovered LSD-25, that was his doctorate was on. He figured out the molecular, not formula, structure of chitin, because, you know, it was being used by that time in 1922 when he graduated from Cologne. It was also now started being used for dental, so internal surgery, not just external. But anyway, so chitosan was simply, it would take water and put in this chitin, and the bacteria activity created, guess what? Chitinase. So they'd harvest it and bottle it. I mean, when I read that, I thought, wow, wait a minute, might be onto something here. So it wasn't until later that, because Oregon is one of the largest producers of really top quality barley for the brewing sector. They have their big school, agricultural school, Oregon State in Corvallis. They have an online portal called Barley World. And so it's a really comprehensive website of international research and what in the barley sector. So that's where I picked up a lot of the other enzymes, because the only ones that matter in the brewing sector is amylase. And all seeds create amylase. That's not unique. What's unique about barley, and especially among grains, it's the only one that creates two forms of amylase, just like the saliva in our mouth, alpha and beta. So, but as far as, which doesn't mean a whole lot in terms of talking about soil, or even, it's a nice factor, but it's not as, in my opinion, not as important as phosphatase or urease. But the main thing it does, it generates an incredible level of microbial activity, which means more food. And like any organism, more food, then you're going to have more bacteria, which means you're going to have more exudates, which means you're going to have a higher and more consistent reproduction rate on your worms.
So we had another question, actually a follow-up to that. What methods do you prefer for pest management?
Oh yeah, this will start a fight. Yeah, I use neem, the virgin stuff, cold pressed neem oil out of India, and cold pressed Karanja oil, and because it's not a poison, there's they act as anti-fetans. They block reproduction. In fact, some of the compounds out of neem are widely used in China and India as a birth control medicine for both livestock as well as humans. There's yeah, the anti-feeding is the big one. So it's you're not poisoning them, if that's, you know, part of somebody's concern. It's not like spraying DDT on it or whatever. And then I use saponins. I prefer using the soap nuts from India because they're 25% saponins and 250,000 parts per million. It's pretty outrageous. Plus you can reuse them 5 or 6 times, so you're really cost effective. Florida has a lot of soap nut trees that came by Portuguese, dropped them off. I know you're real knowledgeable about plants. I mean, the Portuguese moved more plants around the world than any other culture that I can think of in the last 600-700 years. They're the ones that brought.
That's partially how cannabis got spread around the world, because it was on the trade ships. It was part of the standard boat repair kit. That and pine trees to making new masts, rope, and sails in case you got shipwrecked.
Yeah. So I mean, I got started. I started doing sprouted seeds, and I live close to Bob's Red Mill, which offers a lot of retail products, grains and beans and whatever. Well, they have a lot of it in self-serve bulk. So I'd go there and get like a quarter cup of this and a quarter cup of that, Oh, let me try this, So I got some stuff out of that. What's that old one from Ethiopia? Starts with an S, SC. It's a seed they make the bread out of. Really an ancient grain. Yeah, that one. Sure. Sorry about that. I can't think of the name. But anyway, so I go to the counters. I have 10 or a dozen bags with maybe a quarter cup in each one, and they just kind of look at me like, the old guy's lost his mind. And
sorghum?
No, it's Seth. Yeah, Ethiopian bread grain. Somebody needs it. I can't. I'm on an iPad. So, but anyway, it's not important. Oh, teff. That's what I'm thinking of. Teff. TEFF. Really ancient grain. So what I learned though, and a lot of legumes. I mean, you can imagine all the beans that they would sell at a place like Bob's Red Mill. What I learned real quickly is it didn't matter. You want to do peas? We can't do split peas, but you get the idea. You want to do garbanzos? Have at it. Then when somebody told me about barley malt, they got this stuff already made. Yes, I never sprouted another seed. It was over. Now, when you go to a well-equipped homebrew store, they're going to have all kinds of malted grains. Get the one you like. You want to use rye? Use rye. You want to use red wheat, white wheat? You get the idea. It doesn't matter. The only difference is that barley, like I said, contains alpha and beta forms of amylase. I can't see that. I kind of understand what amylase does in a soil. I can't see where having two is going to make a big difference. But if it does, then there you go. There's your reason for using it.
We had another question from chat. What's your opinion on lava rock?
Oh, that's scoria. Absolutely, it's good stuff. Especially in places like the Southwest. How's that? Many landscape yards that sell to the wholesale trade. I know we got a bunch around here. You take in a bucket, you got to bring your own shovel, but they'll let you out on the pile to fill it up for $5 or whatever it is, $4, whatever. And it doesn't matter. It's going to come in black, red, and kind of a grayish color. Mix and match if you want. Do a confetti thingy. But as far as the color properties, no, it doesn't matter.
What just came back to the market this week? I think I saw the thing that was off the market for a bit is a Grow Stone is back under the brand name Buddy Stone now. I remember Grow Stone, the silica glass stuff, the glass.
Oh, yeah. I mean, here's the only reason that I don't like perlite. It has nothing to do with its viability. In fact, I'll just agree with everybody it's the best goddamn stuff that was ever invented. God damn it. But it also has two properties that suck. One is if you're mixing up, and you've seen my plants, if you're mixing up 600, 800 gallons, that's 3 or 4 yards, right? You're going to use a lot of perlite, aren't you? And that shit moves around. And when it hits the surface, the wind carries it away. it's a pain in the ass. And once you put in pumice or scoria, a lava rock, it's not moving. It's going to stay there, providing you the aeration that was the reason you put it there in the first place. But see, perlite, for a lot of people, they're only using the soil once. They get a bag of some magical stuff, whatever, you know, soil magic. Yeah, that'd be a name, Coot soil magic. They don't give a shit. I mean, they're gonna run it through some kind of a growth cycle and then flower it, and then boom, you got to have fresh soil. You won't get good results. So they're not dealing with the realities of a long-term no-till situation. Perlite, in my opinion, is the worst. Not because it's not viable. It provides aeration. It just moves around.
What are some other common myths or misunderstandings that people have about other organic inputs? You've worked with a lot of different ones and know a lot of different things that are kind of maybe people aren't aware of about certain inputs.
Yeah, I just well, we've talked about this one, and this is one of my favorite ones. Okay, back in the late 1800s in Germany, a geologist discovered a deposit of, I'm going to leave that part out for a minute, and his last name was Langbian, and it was the practice in that time period up through about pre-World War II, even in this country. That's how we got Leonardite from Dr. Leonard. This material was named Langbianite. Okay, fair enough. A soil chemist would tell you, oh, that's sulfate of potash magnesia. Sulfur, potash, magnesium, right? It's easy enough. Later, big deposits were discovered around the Great Lakes, upper Midwest. And a corporation was formed under Mosaic, which is one of the larger fertilizer companies in the world. They set up a sub-organization called KMAG. Now, you've discussed KMAG. The K stands for potash, and then the mag is magnesium. You notice how sulfur never gets mentioned in this. I always find that fascinating. Okay. So now we got two names still. We got the Langbianite, and three now. We got KMAG, and we got the sulfate of potash magnesia. Now, KMAG is a big ass corporation. In fact, they sell it in two forms: a powder that is soluble, and one that is more rock, like a salt, rock salt, like you put out when it gets snowy and stuff. Fair enough. So KMAG says, we could sell this to these fertilizer packers. Now, I want you to understand something. You can't come up with one name of a fertilizer anywhere in the market. If it's sold at the retail level in a bag, in a box, the company with naming that had nothing to do with it. It's all outsourced. Can you imagine what the licensing requirements are to set up a fertilizer factory? So where do you find them? Well, you find them in Oklahoma, you find them in Texas. You, the contractor, ship the boxes that are pre-printed, right? So it can say, I don't want to get into names, but think of a name, and they had nothing to do with it, okay? So KMAG says, well, we'll release a product and we'll call it SUL-PO-MAG, sulpo-mag. And they required the packers that the letters showing sulpo-mag had to be of a certain percentage larger than the regular text on there. So there were all these requirements. But my God, think how it goose up your NPK numbers on your soil mix, on your fertilizer mix, if you had, these ultra high levels of magnesium and potassium, and we never mentioned sulfur. I'm not sure why that is. So it's really important in the soil business to do what's called label building. And the philosophy is that if you get more things listed on that label, that you will have a larger market share. And to a large degree, that's probably true. I've seen products that had all 4 names on one label: Langbionite, K-Mag, Sulpo-Mag, sulfate of potash, magnesia. I mean, I get hysterical sometimes reading labels. One of my favorite products to really bash, because this one deserves it, the product called Terpinator. I can see Arnold now, you know, a weed and plant in one hand and this bottle of dribble in the other. I don't know. It was at one time $80 a gallon. It might be more or less. I have no idea. So I'm in the grocery store a few years ago, and I'm buying. I like ripping them off for light bulbs because that's a lost leader for them. You know, stick them where you can. And the gentleman behind the counter is helping some new residents on the highway of broken dreams. And he's getting them set up for a big, we need the lights, got everything, you know, got that whole drill. So I look at this bottle of Terpinator, and it has sulfate of potash. Now remember, K-Mag is sulfate of potash magnesia, right? Well, adjacent to those deposits, you will find sulfate of potash, which is a standard agricultural product. You can go buy it from any farm store. 12 bucks, maybe $15 for a 50-pound bag, 50 pounds. So I did the calculation because right there's the label that they submitted to USDA about how much of this material is in this jug of water. The best I could come up with was about 90 cents worth of this material, because that's why it said shake well. Yeah, I guess so, because neither one of those elements are water soluble, right? Shake well. 2 words you should always avoid. If you're buying a nutrient and it says shake well, pull out your phone and start looking up the terms and see what they actually have in it.
That's a good point about, because you don't see it on everything, but you do see it on some stuff.
Right. I don't care what you do, and I don't care who's making the claim. You cannot turn calcium into water. Calcium is a metallic element, period. Otherwise, our teeth would fall out. I mean, can you imagine if our skeletal system was made of something that could be turned to liquid? And I certainly don't have any confidence that the stoner industry is capable of doing it without a nuclear reactor. I mean, you know, at some point, come on. CalMag lockout? Jesus Christ.
Don't you know, you just got to put more CalMag on it.
That's right. CalMag and what else? I don't know. That'll be something.
Speaking of CalMag, we had someone ask about green sand. What is your opinion on green sand?
This was my standard answer for several years, because if you look at the amount of time that it takes to deconstruct green sand, it's close to 10 years. So what I told people is that it is the world's most expensive and enduring aeration material. Okay, because if you put it in your soil, it ain't going anywhere. And that deposit in New Jersey, because a lot of it refer to as New Jersey green sand, that deposit was wiped out in 1890s. All right, so this stuff I've seen, this is out of Brazil. It's green sand. It's like extremely long-term soil building. If you're trying to get those elements in your soil, there's more direct ways than green sand.
I always tell people it's great for that like bird of paradise that's going to be in your office and get neglected for the next 5 years, or your bonsai trees that are going to sit in that pot for years. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
okay for there, but anywhere
yeah,
else, it just doesn't dissolve or do anything fast enough
yeah.
to be useful. You see this with some of the silica products as well. Some of them are pretty chunky and granular, and it's like, well, that's cool as a replacement for aeration, like you're saying, but it's certainly not going to add anything anytime soon. It's where and you're a big proponent of this. Actually, to segue on that is, do you want to tell us a little about aloe? Because you're a huge proponent of aloe.
Okay, so let me do the history of aloe because I think that is important. Uh, Aloe is one of the earliest plants domesticated by the human race, and it was in Egypt. And as a matter of fact, going to the most ancient of the Egyptian empires, it began being used in the mummification process of corpses. And of course, they didn't have the knowledge and understanding what was going on, but in effect, what it was doing was removing and preventing bacteria from deconstructing the skin before the internal process of mummification. At any event, it arrived in India a few centuries later. Now, this is where it got interesting. This is in the pre-Ayurvedic period when our ancestors, or excuse me, the Europeans were still running around in loincloths, throwing rocks at each other. India was building magnificent temples and becoming this epicenter of the world for plants. It still is the epicenter of the spice trade. And then in northern India, what we today would call Afghanistan, that was your Maharajas. You had the Silk Road going through the north, and you had so it became a big, that's what humans have done for centuries, is move plants. And it became one of the holy plants of the Ayurvedic, of which neem is on the top list, by the way. 72% of Ayurvedic preparations contain some part of the neem tree, bark, leaves, roots, and the kernel, where we get the oil. Anyway, so aloe vera became widely known for its treatment. It still is. If you went into a drugstore, if you had a prescription, or if you went and bought over the counter, anything to do with skin issues, acne, a burn, it's going to contain aloe vera. And the big player, every plant produces, excuse me, I got to exclude desert plants, and I want to stay away from orchids. I'll get into trouble. Plants produce salicylic acid. That's what aspirin's made from. Aspirin is the acetyl form of salicylic acid. Now, had Dr. Bayer known about aloe vera, I'm sure that he would have used aloe vera to make Bayer aspirin in the 1880s versus willow tree shoots. A lot easier to grow aloe vera. Of course, you probably couldn't do it in Germany, at least commercially. So it contains the highest levels of salicylic acid on the planet. And the Bayer Corporation, immediately after World War I, and it was this the world was moving in a different direction. And agriculture was becoming an international issue. So aloe vera, he wanted to find new uses of aloe vera because he already had it down. He was making money off selling aspirin, right? And if you're a manufacturer, what do? Well, you look for new markets for this thing, this secret that you found. And research started here in Oregon at Oregon State University, which is, we have a school of agriculture there and a school of horticulture. And they began testing this as a rooting agent. And lo and behold, started in about 1919, the research finished up in 1922, I think it was. And that gave birth to a product. This is how universities work. Corporations finance the research, Then you take that research and turn it into a product. You sell it long enough to recoup your monies, and then you sell the product for a profit. And that's how the first rooting compound of the name of Hormex, Hormex, that's that whole story. And it's still sold today. If you go to a commercial nursery, I'm not talking about a cannabis thing where you got Olivia's and Clonex and all this other silliness. It went to a nursery where they're doing like Monroe Nursery out here is 1,000 acres. They do like 10,000 cuts a week. And talk about tough love. They're not doing it like, well, let's put them in trays and we'll put them on, this is really tough love. And Hormex or some form of salicylic acid is the rooting deal. Boom, boom, boom. So along about 1932, at Oxford University in England, they discovered that kelp, again, not seaweed extract, that wasn't even invented until 1951. The kelp contained what we now know as IAA, indoleacetic acid. You've seen that on rooting products. And IBA, indobutyric 3 acetic acid. And both of those compounds are found in kelp in high levels, kelp meal. So I came up with a method of getting organic aloe vera gel, which is available from a company called Lily of the Desert, because aloe vera is a lily, not a cacti or a succulent. Now, it might be a succulent, it's not a cacti. And it comes in an organic form. And so the recipe was to take a pint, 16 ounces of this organic gel, dump it into a bowl, mix in a tablespoon or something of kelp meal with a little bit of fulvic acid from your next guest, Dr. Fost, BioAg, and boom, you have this incredible rooting compound that costs you about, I don't know, $8 for enough gel to do 1,000 plants over the next year. You got to store it in the refrigerator too. So anytime you come up with a product that is going to hurt a commercial aspect of the cannabis, then you have to have the, I don't know, what do you call them? The ne'er-do-wells that, come out with the silly ass. The better the product is, the more criticism you're going to take. And so that just became, you guys want to play? Sure, here you go. So I think I outdid them. Yeah. Oh, and the other one I want to tell people, when you're looking at materials at the grocery store or whatever, you're going to see IBA, safe to use, IAA, that's dip and grow is IBA. IAA means indoleacetic acid, safe to use, salicylic acid, obviously safe to use. The one that you do not want to use is NAC, naphtha acetic acid. That is a Monsanto pesticide created in 1953, and some jackoff figured out in the 60s that you could use it as a rooting compound, and now you find it in products. It should be labeled not safe for food at the very least. Again, I think making your own from the raw materials is the way to go because you pay nothing. I mean, I've seen what packs of Clonex cost, and like I said, you can make 16 ounces for $8. So whatever. They used to have my pictures in grocery stores around Portland. I had, a red circle with a slice across the middle. And it said on my picture, and it said, "Do not engage this asshole." So.
And people can find a lot of these natural inputs in other places other than grocery stores. I know you've often talked about getting them in Chinatown and other places. You want to maybe touch on that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, think about this for your commercial listeners. Salicylic acid has been used for 100 years as the rooting compound in the commercial wholesale, what do you call it? Nursery stock sector, okay? Commercial nurseries. A kilo from a company that Phytotechnologies. A kilo is under $50. That'll make 55 gallons of rooting compound. I mean, think about that for a minute. And no silliness, we're talking science, just science, science, science. You know, it's, I laugh at, you know, you want to show me a product and it's got a cool label. Okay, wow, it'd be like, you know, looking at album covers in the 70s. Well, I really like the album cover. I bet the music's good too. Well, we'll see. You know, and I would say the same thing about materials, that the more groovy they want to be, then, you know, walk away. I want plain wrap. I want a white box with blue lettering that says kelp meal. You know, I don't need a picture of the ocean and, you know, Susie and the dog and walking down the beach and, you know, all moving and grooving and getting hopey and dopey, you know.
Absolutely. Well, how can people find out more education from you, or other ways to learn more about you? I know they could definitely check out my channel and Fumodor's channel. You've given quite a few hours of talks there. And where else can they find you?
I would, you know, I'd rather do this because I'm, you know, really retired and I don't have a lot of, what's the word? Oh, just leave it at that. I only recommend 3 books. Okay, here's all you need to know. The first book is called Vermiculture Technologies, written by Clive Edwards, Dr. Clive Edwards, who spent over 65 years as an entomologist, 2 PhDs, one from Oxford University and one from Ohio State. He's the father. I just learned he passed away back this last summer. I mean, we wouldn't have vermiculture as we understand it today without his work. That book is the best investment any grower can make. Vermiculture Technology, Dr. Clive Edwards. The next book that I would say is mandatory would be, oh, I want to touch on this one before I go. Okay. So I've been getting into serious, well, for me, serious mycology and doing fruiting blocks of lion's mane and oysters and what have you. And after you, so even you folks out there that don't want to go through all that, you can buy these kits online and you peel the plastic back and it grows a mushroom. And what you're left with is a block of mycelium. And we can take that mycelium and put it into our compost piles after it's gone through its thermophilic cycle, right? And can you imagine the amount of fungi you're introducing into your compost pile with an agricultural waste? So it's going to help deconstruct the material faster. Having a fungal colony in your compost is going to attract other fungi. So that's a plus, because one of the, not criticism, one of the realities is that both worm bins as well as thermophilic are mostly bacteria driven. So that anything we can do to up the levels of fungal colonies is to our benefit, whether you're talking about beds or container grown plants or what have you. Though I would say that the beds or the containers I use would probably qualify as a bed, wouldn't you? 4 yards. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of soil. That's 2 pallets. So, you know.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know we